Hello, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you may be calling from. Thank you so much for joining us today. I know your time is incredibly valuable, and we really appreciate you spending this next hour with us for some fun. The first webinar in our PCA and HCCN Professional Development Series. I am Allison Abayasekara. I'm the Vice President of Training and Programs here at the Association of Clinicians for the Underserved. I see a lot of familiar names on our attendees list, so I'll do the kind of quick background overview stuff really quickly, since you seem to know who we are. But here at ACU, we're really focused on recruitment and retention of clinicians into underserved areas as our way to address the access to care issue. So we do a lot of work with National Health Service Corps, policy and advocacy. We do resources, training, network, and all the traditional nonprofit capacity building stuff. ACU itself receives a national cooperative agreement from HRSA's Bureau of Primary Health Care to do work on clinician workforce issues at health centers. We're one of two workforce NCAs. The other group is Community Health Center, Inc., which you may be familiar with. They focus on pipeline and team-based care. Here at ACU, we're focused specifically on recruitment and retention. So we're the two main workforce ones. Our NCA, we gave a special title called the STAR Center, Solutions, Training, and Assistance for Recruitment and Retention. Everything and anything related to clinician recruitment retention is what we try and do. Everything is housed on our separate project website, chcworkforce.org. Hopefully lots of you have spent a lot of time on that site and know what it is. If not, please take some time to click around and get familiar. I'm going to reference a lot of tools today, and those are all going to be housed there. Anytime you see that STAR Center sign, it means that it's been funded by the Bureau and it's free for you and your health centers to use. I am not alone in all of this work or even on this webinar. We have a variety of faculty that are all on this call, and you'll be hearing from different folks throughout this series, as well as on a lot of the other things we're doing. Our contact information's here, and you can access this along with the slides for today in the handouts tab in your go-to platform box on the right-hand side of your screen. So check that out. You can download those, and I hope you'll feel free to get in touch with us at any time. We're hoping that this whole series and this regular time together can be a chance to really spend some time talking about workforce issues, but from a PCA and an HCCN perspective rather than just a health center perspective. We got a lot of requests from people who are coming in and out of workforce roles at their respective state and regional organizations. And so people said, oh, hey, I'm an expert in National Health Service Corps, but I'm not an expert in data. Or I really know a lot about training planning, but I don't know a lot about the content of workforce yet because I've come from a different industry. And so the whole idea of this whole thing was really just to spend some time going through workforce topics, making sure you guys are familiar with at least our approach to those workforce topics and what exists out there. Each time we want to make sure we're sharing some PCA and HCCN successes. So you'll hear from your compatriots on what they're doing really well in that specific area, and of course help keep you connected with others through some channels that kind of already exist. So all of these webinars are part of this usual stuff. We are recording these, so just FYI, in case you lose us partway through or want to come back to it, we'll have the archived recording available, and we hope that you'll ask questions as we go, and afterwards, feel free to follow up with us. And of course, we want you to have fun, because what's the point of any of this if we're not at least trying to make some laughs as we go? If you have questions throughout any of this or have problems, you can reach out to Mariah. She's already put something in the chat box, but email her, chat her, whatever you need to do, and we'll make sure you're staying with us. Our goals for this particular session are to review kind of health center workforce data, high level, what is it, what kinds of stuff is it, why would health centers look at it, We want to do the same for state and regional workforce data, kind of what's the point, and what things could you at a PCA or HCCN be looking at or thinking about it. And you're going to hear from an expert at CHAMPS, Andrea Martin. They are the Region 8 PCA, and they have so much data. Guys, you're going to be really excited to hear about it. So I hope it's going to be a really productive hour for us to at least get you going, and it's going to be kind of ongoing reference. We have a lot of lists in these slides, so hopefully you'll get jump started and excited about the content today and take it back. But speaking of taking it back, we want to hear where you are kind of right now in your own organizations. I think we have a pretty good sense based on some curriculum planning and other activities that we've done before, but would like to hear about the folks specifically on the phone, where you are at. Does your organization currently collect any workforce data? You've got 4 options to pick from there. A, I'm not sure. B, we're not there yet. Yes, we do some basics, or the final option is yes, and we're practically experts. So we'll keep track of those folks later so we can check back with you and see what you have to share with others. This is not a binding contract, but choose what feels right to you in your gut there. And we'll have Mariah close the poll in about 5 seconds and read out the answers. So this is your last chance. Make your selections. Tell us about where you're at right now, and we'll do our best to kind of adapt our comments as we go forward and any resources we're going to make as a follow-up.
All right. Thank you, everybody, for chiming in on the poll there. So we have 21% of folks who responded said we're not there yet. 71%, a whopping 71% of you said yes, we do some basics. And 7% said yes, and we're practically experts.
Awesome, exciting. What a great crew we have on. Then I hope that you'll feel free to use the chat and ask questions if you say like, oh, that's not what we do, or we don't get that, or we're way beyond that. Tell us what else we should do. So thank you so much for sharing, and feel free to check in with us as we go. But away we go to the world of workforce data. It's all very exciting. I don't naturally come to data, and I think a lot of you brainiacs out there are trained in this kind of stuff and have a lot of capacity for it. But the one thing that kind of keeps me going when I feel overwhelmed with some of this stuff is my favorite quote, which is, without data, you're just another person with an opinion. The more that I spend time in this world and the more that I try and figure out what's the right set of strategies to help things overall get better, the more I realize that you really have to have at least a data-informed approach to things, if not a data-driven one. And so I think the data-informed piece is where a lot of the, yes, we're doing the basic stuff exists. And I think you want to try and eventually get towards, okay, how are we actually using that data that we're taking through? There is so much stuff out there, so much data. You could do so much all the time. That could be all you do. And we're going to cover a few different types today, but we want to just talk about a few of the underlying concepts of what we think are kind of data that's actually going to be really user-friendly for you. One big concept is that you need to have specifics as much as possible. It can be really tempting, and in some ways you're always going to need things like averages and medians and some of those pieces when you're looking at a big group of things. But you have to have access to the specific data that's going to help you tease out what's possible and where there might actually be numbers skewing your average, and how that's going to impact your understanding of the data that you have. We really think any data you spend any time on should be connected to bottom line and larger issues. So it's not kind of enough to just say, oh, I happen to know what our turnover rate is. You have to know what your turnover rate is, and then, of course, how much it costs you every time all the different types of people who are caught up in that turnover rate leave. And then, in general, what that might mean for your state or your community or your region, depending on the type of facility you guys are, to say, oh, I see a turnover rate average is this one, that might mean one thing, but if it turns out we just have a high turnover rate in these 3 health centers, well, that's also something completely different, and we may or may not need to address systemic issues there. We also just want to highlight that data really just offers the opportunity for more exploration. Numbers are numbers, and as much as everyone seems to be living and dying by data these days, at the end of the day, it's nothing without the context. So the context is what you guys have, it's what your health centers have to tell you how to make sense and meaning of the data that's out there, so that you can actually get to those concrete issues and solutions. Workforce challenges are really, really big problems, and you can't just try and solve all of it with one approach. The idea is really that you're trying to break things into really manageable breadcrumbs to figure out how you as a PCA or HCCN is going to approach helping your health centers with that problem. So we wanted to start with health center data. I know this is for you guys, but some folks have said, hey, I don't really know kind of what data health centers should be using, or they sort of have told me, but I'm not really sure what that means or why they would use things. And so we started with some kind of overall use questions, which was, why are health centers using this information and what would they be doing with it? So we think a lot of this health center data is trying to answer, or should be trying to answer, these 4 questions. What's happening at the organization that's making it difficult to recruit and retain staff? Where are the specific pressure points? What's working and why? And then again, how do we break big challenges down into manageable pieces? Of those questions and of all the data points, this is the kind of process that we've heard from health centers they're using and that we think is a good approach in terms of the questions to ask as you're collecting and then analyzing data at a health center level. So one, you want to kind of figure out what's happening at the organization, at the site, and at a specific individual level. So what's going on? Where are there some things that are going really well? Where are there problem spots? And then what are the root causes of those problems? And what additional information do we need? And that's kind of the context stuff, right? Then the last kind of questions actually get to, okay, now we're going to do something about that data. So what solutions can we test through a PDSA cycle? That's the Plan, Do, Study, Act cycle. I'm sure y'all are very familiar with it. It's essentially a way to put more data into your data. Hooray! Why not? But we really think health centers can try these processes and get some movement. And then the next question is, what do we tackle next? So the 3 questions in bold are the ones that are specific kind of to a health center approach. We'll show you some questions shortly for a PCA HCCN approach, but you'll see these 4 in the middle: what's going well, where are there problems, why are there problems, and what other information do we need? That's the kind of stuff that's consistent across your approach, whether or not you're a health center or a PCA or an HCCN or whatever you might be. And so the idea is really that you look at this process to help you decide which data points you might need and how you might use them. We think of health center, and we do a lot of training for health centers, their data in kind of these 3 big buckets. And spoiler alert, we think of PCA HCCN data as also coming in these 3 buckets. So it's really an approach by saying, okay, what's going on at the organization or organizations? What's going on kind of at the human resources type of level, and then what's going on from partners, and that's really the people and the environment around you. I could talk about all of these things all day probably, but we have limited time here together. So I'll just touch on a few of them. But organizational data is a lot of the stuff that you will find in kind of UDS, and will give you a general sense of what's going on at the organizational level in terms of practice environment and some of the things that may be specific to an organizational culture, although may vary within kind of the site level. So, an example of one of those things is competitive salary. So a data point that a health center would have is kind of what's our salary compared to the local market. And we would hope that the answer to that data point is basically it indicates maybe it's a major inability to recruit or retain. Or something like productivity expectations. A lot of times health centers look at those kind of from a CFO perspective, but they can use it on the workforce side to get a good sense of whether or not there's a potential for, burnout issues or overall dissatisfaction and disengagement. So it's a lot of this kind of stuff that's just looking like, okay, how is this organization approaching their staffing, and how is the practice environment helpful or harmful to their ability to recruit or retain? The HR data stuff for health centers is really this like sexy, fun stuff that people love to talk about. I certainly love it. And it's things like time to fill, so the length of time required to recruit each of the disciplines that they ever try to recruit. And that kind of number will identify how a health center needs to plan for recruitment and maybe connect some of their cost metrics to what their priorities are. It also includes things like turnover rates, length of tenure, absence trends. Some of these are things that are really useful to you at a PCA, HCCN level, those first three. Some things are more interesting at a health center level, like absence trends helps you get a good sense of where you're starting to have some disengaged staff as you go. And so, again, you'll start to sort of see as you spend more time thinking about the different data points, some things are always going to be more useful to health centers than to PCAs or HCCNs, but overall there's definitely some overlap in numbers. And that overlap is actually really helpful because it means you don't need to ask health centers to collect anything different. You just need to get access to something that they may already have. The one thing that's a little trickier to quantify in some ways and can be definitely health center specific stuff and where you're going to see some major variance is with partner data. And it's the kind of stuff trying to figure out what a health center needs to consider in their larger environment. So, for example, if their competitor is adding a new site or having a change of scope, or all of a sudden they have new services available, how do they consider that as part of their overall workforce plan and how they need to approach problems. So a lot of this partner data and community level stuff is going to be really specific to each health center and may not be necessarily useful for you as a PCA or an HCCN to look at, but it's definitely something that should be part of the conversation and something that you'll want to keep in mind as you go. But that takes us to the state and the regional data pieces, which is, what are our use questions for you guys? What questions do we think that you're thinking about when you're considering collecting and analyzing your data? We came up with some big ones. What are the main issues for health centers for recruitment and retention? Which disciplines are offering the biggest challenge? That was a question I got a lot when I was working at a PCA. What are the themes affecting most organizations? And these are great state or regional level conversations to have there. What are the root causes of some of these issues? And again, how do we break big challenges down into manageable pieces? So we hope that a lot of your data is answering these big 5 questions for your health centers. It's those same buckets of information that I'd mentioned earlier, organizational data, HR data, and partner surveys, but the process pieces are a little bit different at the tail ends for you guys. Instead of asking what's happening kind of at the org site and then individual person level, you're asking kind of what's happening at the organization and then up to the state or regional level. So what's generally going on and also what's going on at specific organizations. You're still going to ask those same questions. So once you get to that level of data, where are things going well? Where are the problem spots? What are the root causes of problems? And what additional information do we need? But then again, you're going to try and do something slightly different with the answers to those questions, which is what training resources, TA assistance, capacity building, etc. can we offer to help? And how are all of our supportive efforts leading to big picture change? A lot of times, too, PCAs and HCCNs can fill a real void for health centers by just collecting the information at that state or regional level. So you don't necessarily need to develop a whole training plan based on what you find. You can often add a lot of value just by virtue of collecting it and making that level of information available to your health centers, and then helping them with some of the analysis and using that level of information for your own analysis. The org level stuff, a lot of it's the same, and a lot of it, again, is from UDS and things that you already have access to and I'm sure are already working with. Some differences here or additional key points are things like provider types. Looking at, for example, what different types of folks are employed at your health centers. A lot of it, too, is just having a different way of answering the what does this data point indicate question. So an example would be National Health Service Corps utilization. The health center is looking at that number. They're looking at it to find, oh, are we too dependent on this for recruitment? Oh, health centers historically have a problem keeping their National Health Service Corps folks. How are we doing with keeping our folks? They're asking those kinds of questions. You can look at the exact same number at a state or regional level and say, okay, where are most federal level National Health Service Corps resources going in our state? What does that tell me about what's going on with health professional shortage area scores? What does that tell me about, what our health centers are really needing and relying on this federal program for? What does that tell me about what we need to do with our own kind of efforts to bolster that program? And so, again, a lot of it's the same data. You're just kind of looking at it with a different set of glasses to figure out what your action plan is at the state level. At the HR data level, it's a lot of the same here. You had those time to fill, turnover, tenure, but we also wanted to add your vacancy rates. This is something that a health center, I'm sure, would look at, but this is one of the big ones for PCAs, HCCNs, is getting a sense of how often there are vacancies, how long the vacancies are, and for what types of clinicians those vacancies are. And being able to answer that question based on data you're receiving from your health centers is really, really helpful. The partner data stuff is the stuff that we said, oh, this is probably going to be the biggest difference stuff. And you'll see a lot of federal and state level information we know you guys are already collecting on your environment. So what are the federal policy and regulatory plans that couldn't have an impact on your health centers? What are the state policy and regulatory things? What are some state and regional partner plans? I know many of you are very interconnected within your state on things. And then other things like national trends and resources. So being a great organization that monitors and understands and can provide the information back to your health centers, it can sometimes feel, oh, that's not quite data, that's information, but there are definitely ways to quantify it and consider it as you're making your own kind of data analysis and plans. I'm happy to say, have several resources that are helpful to both you, hopefully, and your health centers. Data profiles are a big one. We so appreciate so many of you have done a lot of work with us in the last few years on those. I'm happy to say that we are transitioning those this coming year or this current year to living in a Tableau space online. So instead of a PDF, instead of getting a set of PDFs for your health center that has all of that org level data in it, it's going to live online in Tableau, and you'll be able to interact with it a lot better at the PCA HCCN level. And your health centers are going to be able to interact with their own individual level a lot better. So the data profiles still exist. We're still working on those, and that captures a lot of the organizational level data. If for some reason you want to look at it that way, or you already have great UDS pieces, but you want to focus on the workforce side of it. We also have a financial impact tool which helps health centers collect, based on their individual numbers, the cost essentially to recruit, including the cost every time they have a vacancy and what it costs to recruit them. It's great as much as you can to get that information from your health centers to get a good sense of, okay, what kinds of resources you're actually looking at a state or regional level to help them get where they need to go. We also have coming soon some new exciting things, a strategic planning workbook to incorporate a lot of that partner piece that I mentioned. We're going to be running an HR metrics learning collaborative in the spring, so your health centers will be able to participate in that, and then we'll be developing materials that you guys can use yourselves. And then there's a very exciting turnover analysis tool coming, which we will be seeking your feedback on, both before we even build it and after it's made. I'll just tell you the big picture goal is that we hear all the time from folks that they would really like a national set of data on what the turnover rate is at health centers. And so we are going to be building a web-based tool that will help people identify and kind of think through that turnover number. Our goal is to then connect with you at PCAs and HCCNs and give you access to that so that you can see whatever it is that we get at an individual level and start to get some of that data. So we're going to be collecting your input on that kind of thing. I know several of you have expertise and have done something like that for your states, or you know others who have. But we're working on a lot more of this stuff for both you guys and your health centers, and happy to have more conversations with you as we go. We do also have a new overall NCA resource I know several of you have heard me talk about it before. All 20 NCAs, all of those 20 national organizations that receive that National Cooperative Agreement have come together the last couple of years and created what we call the National Resource Center. The National Resource Center is all of us together. And we had two main tasks. One of them is to do this needs assessment that you've all been getting blitzed on emails about. And the second one is to make a clearinghouse of all of our resources. So that's now live at healthcenterinfo.org. That also has some different pieces of data, tools, and resources that you can go to connect with all of us. So we hope that you'll check that out. Okay, so that was a lot of stuff. We're about to transition, so you get to hear a whole different person talk for a little while. Send your questions, but we're going to ask you to chime in on a poll here, one, to get a little sense of where you guys are going and how we can incorporate that feedback into all the things that I just mentioned. What might be your next priority in collecting and analyzing workforce data? A, crying a little and then taking a nap, which I admit was my approach for quite some time. B, figuring out what kind of capacity you have for this. C, taking a closer look at the data you already have. I'm going to guess a lot of you are going to pick that since a lot of you already have some data. Or D, getting more info on how to analyze and make your data actionable. There's a lot that can be developed for you on how to even collect these things, or there's also a lot of stuff that can be developed for you on how to actually analyze and put these things into motion. So make your selections. In about 5 seconds, Mariah is going to close the poll and read out our answers, and then we'll be moving forward with Andrea.
Okay, thanks everybody. I'm happy to report that nobody selected option A. We had a pretty even split between the other three options, with 43% of folks saying they were going to figure out what kind of capacity they have for this. 29% said they're taking a closer look at the data they already have, and 29% said they're getting more info on how to analyze and make our data actionable.
Fabulous. Thank you, Mariah. Thank you, you guys, for sharing that. That's helpful to know that you guys are kind of split among the three, and we're going to take that into consideration, again, as we approach you over the next couple of months about that tool that we're making. So lots of opportunity to continue this conversation, but for now, you're going to hear it straight from a PCA. I'm happy to report that we have a guest expert on the line today who's going to tell you about what's going on at their organization and the experience that they have. We have with us Andrea Martin. She is the Workforce Development and Member Services Director at the Community Health Association of Mountain Plains States. She has a Bachelor of Arts in Art, Music, and Museum Studies from Luther College in Decorah, Iowa, and previously has used her skills at non- and for-profit cultural organizations throughout Denver. But she has spent the last 14 years serving the needs of Region 8 community, migrant, and homeless health centers, including activities designed to provide these organizations with the tools they need to attract and retain a talented and dedicated workforce. One major component of that work is overseeing the collection and analysis of a wide variety of health center workforce metrics to assess the environment of the region, support health center efforts to improve recruitment and retention programs and financial performance, and guide future CHAMPS offerings. She truly is an expert. She knows what it's like to be in your shoes, and I'm going to let her take it away now.
Great. Thank you so much, Allison. It's great to be here. Thank you for having me. So welcome, everybody. Thanks for letting me be here with you. Oops, I was pushing buttons too fast. Let's see if I can make it go backwards. As Allison was saying, I've worked with CHAMPS for 14 years now in the workforce area the entire time. CHAMPS is a regional primary care association. So some of you on the line may or may not be familiar with regional associations. We follow the same cooperative agreement guidance as a state-based primary care association does, but we serve a region of states. So I specifically work with Region 8, Colorado, Montana, North and South Dakota, Utah, and Wyoming. And I work not only with the health centers in those states, but also very, very closely with the state-based primary care associations in those states. The reason why I put my mission up on the slide is that workforce development is part of our mission. So it is something that we do focus on. It's in our current strategic plan, and it's definitely something of concern, which I don't think is shocking to anybody on the call. So if you end up having any questions about any of the stuff I go over today, feel free to email me. I'm happy to have a chat with anybody who might want it. So I put up just a few of the sort of products that we end up with when we're starting to look at workforce data. Workforce at CHAMPS really began, our most current focus began back in, I think, 2004-ish. Way back then, all of the PCAs nationally received additional funding in their base grants to address workforce issues. So at that time, CHAMPS worked really, again, closely with our state-based PCAs to figure out what would we want to do on a regional level to look at workforce. And there were a lot of metric processes that came out of that discussion, of that planning at our regional level. So this is just a quick list of all the stuff that I'm going to touch on today. Most of this is described on that publications page that I linked at the bottom. So if you're interested in any of them particularly and you want to look it up there before you email me, please feel free. So all of us have access, obviously, to UDS information. So when we're going through these, I'm going to look at, what we're looking at, why we're decided to look at some of these different metrics, how we're using them, how we might change them, that sort of thing. Some of them, we just wanted to be able to look at the environment that our health centers were working in. What does our region look like in a way where we didn't have to ask them for anything additional than they're already being asked for. All of these materials really are intended for a wide variety of purposes. So we want our health centers to be able to benchmark themselves so they can identify really what's going well in their organization, what might be some problem spots when they're looking at themselves as compared to some of their similar organizations. CHAMPS and our state-based PCAs look at this to look at change within the region, what's changing from year to year, what does that tell us about our workforce environment that our health centers are working with. It informs the conversations that we have as PCAs. We talk a lot about what's going on within our states and the region, looking for commonalities, looking for differences to really help us understand and learn from what's going on. CHAMPS pulls from all of these data sources when we're looking at our cooperative agreement application, when we're looking at trying to explain to the government why we want to do with their money, what we want to do with their money. And then we also know that a lot of our health centers pull from this information also when they're looking to either write grant applications or different kinds of narratives and things like that. So lots of different reasons, obviously, that we'll have these. With the uniform data system, we create an annual summary every year that looks at state, regional, and national metrics for all sorts of UDS data. In the workforce realm, we're looking at different kinds of staffing FTEs and how they're changing over time, looking at staffing ratios, what's the ratio of dental FTEs to the entire population of FTEs, for example. We're looking at what kind of productivity figures are coming out. So I put a little graph of some of the 2017 visits per FTE that were coming out for some of our providers this year. We were looking at the Bureau's key staff tenure figure, and then we took a kind of a deeper dive into that to try to figure out what percentage of each of those key staff were our health centers reporting as locum as opposed to their own non-locum full and part-time staff, to see if that would illustrate kind of what needs might be across the region. We pull out some financial performance information, and we look at a lot of different factors that could impact that financial performance. And so sometimes we look at there's a couple workforce issues in there. So, for example, how many patients per staff FTE are we looking at for the state and the region and the nation, and how much income per staff FTE are we looking at? So again, this is looking at it in a state annual snapshot, but also looking at trends over time to see how things are changing. So those are just a couple quick looks at what is in that UDS portion. One of the activities that really came out of that discussion with the state-based PCAs of what we wanted to do with our workforce funding back in the early 2000s was we implemented just a free online job bank, so we could advertise positions for our health centers for free. So they send them their stuff, we post it, we put it up, and we try to gather some information from all of our health centers so we can do some metrics on the other end of the process. So we'll look at the types of postings that people are putting up. So for example, when we look out over time, we've definitely seen a swing towards the more comprehensive services. So the representation of behavioral health and oral health postings, for example, is becoming bigger. When we first started, it was much more of a medically focused kind of postings on the job bank. So kind of looking at the changing workforce, we're using it for fill rates. So when somebody needs to deactivate a position, we find out whether the position was filled or whether or not they're closing it because they can't fill it, or they're trying to figure out something else to do, or reorganizing in some way. So what's filling and what's not. If they're filling, how long, or what are those recruitment lengths for filled positions and for all positions? If they were filled, what were those successful recruitment resources? So we ask everybody, how did the successful candidate hear about the position? It would be great if they all said it was our job bank, but it's not because there's so many things out there. But we try to figure out, is this an employee referral? Was it somebody who just saw it randomly on the health center's job bank? Did it come from National Health Service Corps? So then every year we pull together a comparison report, kind of looking at that, and we compare one year to the next year. So again, taking the information that we already had in-house and figuring out where we might be able, what kind of interesting information we can pull from it, again, without having to ask the health centers for anything additional. CHAMPS also worked every year that we have a report that our members have access to take, which is an annual measure of finance operations and productivity, or AMFOP. This is one that also happens in Region 10. Northwest Regional Primary Care Association, or NWRPCA, is the Region 10 Primary Care Association working with Alaska, Idaho, Oregon, and Washington. And they also do AMFOP, and that looks at some workforce-related metrics: salary per FTE, benefits per FTE, fully loaded labor costs. I'll be honest, I don't totally know what that is because it's not my area. But then also looking at some patients and encounters, some productivity information. So we do that on a regular basis as well. I wanted to put in there another annual item we work on. I'm sure many of you are familiar with having to do needs assessments of the health centers in your region for their training and TA needs. And we always have some workforce items in that as well. We do questions related, for example, to top environmental challenges and concerns. What's happening in their world that is of a challenge or concern to them every year. So for example, when we did our 2018 needs assessment back at the very beginning of the year, of the top 10 challenges and concerns, the number 2 concern was staff retention, as reported by all the participants from our health centers region-wide, and number 4 on that list was recruitment of providers. So again, just kind of monitoring what seems to be of most concern for them. What are they worried about right now? We had all sorts of different training and technical assistant topics areas, which we particularly grouped in terms of the PCA work plan areas. So we had, for example, a whole section of recruitment and retention and development of workforce, because that was a specific phrase used in the PCA guidance. And so, but we also have workforce related training and TA topics listed in other big buckets as well. We look at that data when it comes out. What are those top ranking topics that people are saying they need training and TA in? We look at it. What is everybody saying? What's ranking high in just in terms of various workforce types of topics, but also what are, for example, what is HR saying is really high, and how does that compare with what the CEO might be saying or the medical directors? So we have those. That's internal. We use that at CHAMPS, and we share. We work, again, really with our state-based PCAs to pull together all that data. They use the data the state-based PCAs do on their state level, and we use it on the regional level. We use it a lot to plan collaborative activities, and we have a lot of discussions about not duplicating effort and that we're really complementing our services. And so the needs assessment is really important to us to make sure that we're really aware of what's going on and what's needed and how we're all addressing that. So then this one is the big one. I am deep in data for this particular process right now. Every 2 years, we do a salary, benefits, turnover, and vacancy survey of Region 8. Again, we work really close with all of our individual state PCAs. The biggest effort comes from our Colorado state PCA. Colorado has been doing a salary survey for probably 15 or 20 years. Back in 2004, the region decided we wanted to do it regionally. So we still work really closely with Colorado to do this. They pull the data from the Colorado health centers, and I pull the data from everybody else in the region, and we combine it and spit out some great metrics. Some of it's most useful for the health centers. Some of it's probably most useful for the PCAs, looking at what's going on at the health center level. But there's a lot of information in there. We have an advisory committee of health center and PCA staff that really inform what we're going to do with this every 2 years, and make sure that the metrics we're asking about are the ones that are going to be as useful as possible for everyone involved without being too outrageously difficult to complete. It's still huge, it's still difficult to complete, but we try to make sure that we're really listening closely to what the health centers really want when we're creating the tool every 2 years for that. So we have like compensation data in it. We're getting salary, annual salary, base salary, annual additional pay, and annual benefits paid for all employees that are currently employed for all titles. So it's not just leadership, it's not just providers, it's not one average figure reported for a provider, it is individual figures for every employee, which is more work for our health centers, but it makes a really, really robust group of data. We ask them about the benefits packages that they have according to their policies, sort of what those packages look like. We have recruitment information in there about what titles are they seeing that seem to be challenging in terms of recruitment. There's also one that's challenging in terms of turnover. So we're kind of comparing which areas of their world in their staffing is more challenging to recruit versus to retain. We have a point in time vacancy survey where we're looking at executive level, provider level, and advanced practice provider level staff. We are looking at their needs in terms of recruitment. What do you really need? What would help you? If you could have anything, what would you want, and what do you need in order to get it? In terms of recruitment, we also do one of those same questions in terms of retention issues. It's interesting, I'm just analyzing the retention needs information now. 2 years ago, people said the top thing they needed in order to retain their staff was more money for salaries. This year, it's all over the map. Money for salaries is way down the list. The top ranking item is a variety of different kinds of training as well. So it's really interesting to see what's changing throughout the years. We also have a turnover rates survey. And so when Allison's talking about doing something nationally, it's really interesting. We do it for all staff, and we have 5 main staff kind of buckets. We don't do it for individual titles in terms of turnover. But one thing we did add this year, and we're just starting to analyze it now, is a difference between involuntary and voluntary turnover. So whether it's employee initiated or organization initiated. So I'm interested to see what'll come out from that. We asked them some additional things like, what are their plans for salary increases? What does their workforce look like? What are some of the demographics in terms of ethnic and racial minorities in their workforce at their health center, in terms of veterans, in terms of college level education? And some of that came out from information we couldn't pull from UDS, but that would be really helpful for PCAs when we're trying to apply for funding from other funders who want to know more about the demographics of our workforce, and we just didn't know. So we started to try to gather some of that information here. Something that's interesting that we also look at in terms of staffing is how things are changing from year to year. So for example, between 2016 and 2018, we noticed that there was over 100% increase in the actual number of care coordinators and patient navigators that were reported. So we can kind of watch that sort of changing, what kind of the current trends are in the workforce and who they're looking for. So, you know, over the last several years, we've seen a big increase in the number of QI staff that they're looking for. Most recently, we're looking at how many director level QI people do they have, and that number is increasing a lot. So just really helps us keep a pulse on what's going on in our workforce. From that salary survey that we do every 2 years, there's 2 additional reports we put out related to it. One is a clinical staffing report. So we're looking at medical, dental, and behavioral health employees and FTEs. So we're looking at the ratios, you know, what's your ratio of medical to dental to behavioral health? When you're looking at medical, what's your ratio of medical directors versus physicians, NPs, PAs, et cetera? When you're looking at support staff, what's your ratio of a provider to a support staff FTE? What's your ratio of a physician to those support staff FTE? So kind of looking at that in a variety of ways, and those kind of addressing some of those things like provider type that Allison was looking at. Those admin support ratios she was looking at. One of the things we're kind of thinking about for that clinical staffing report, this comes from all of those individual health individual employees that they reported for the salary survey. That's where we're pulling this information for the clinical staffing report. And so one thing that I think would be interesting to maybe look at if we have time to build it into our process is maybe a look at a comparison of full versus part-time for those employees, because we have the data available in the salary survey. We just need to figure out what it looks like and how we might report it. We also have questions in the salary survey to a separate tab of questions that asks about provider productivity expectations. So not what are you doing, because we can pull some of that what are you doing information from UDS, but what are you telling your providers you want them to do in terms of full-time hours per week, your expected ratio of administrative versus direct patient contact time, the number of visits to be completed hourly, and their standard patient panel sizes for full-time providers. And we break it down into specific titles and separate the director level out from the others. So there's a medical director, we want to know answers for that, physician, NP, PA, et cetera. And so in 2018, we just added the behavioral health titles. So we're going to see, I don't know, what is that going to look like? We've done some preliminary looks at that, and there definitely are differences between medical, dental, and behavioral health, which shouldn't be surprising, but it'll be fun to see what happens. So for example, you're looking at the 2018 average hourly visits that are expected of those different kinds of medical providers, just for having something fun on the screen. We also, twice in my tenure at CHAMP, so this is not on a regular schedule, but 2 times so far, we've done a staff recruitment and retention survey where we send out the survey to as many staff members as we can find in the region. And the last time we did it was a while ago, it was 2011, and we got responses from, I think, about 1,200 people working at Region 8 health centers, which for us was really great. And it was like representing 90% of the health centers in the region or something like that. So it was our way of trying to get some information about the staff demographics. Are these male or female in general? You know, what kind of education did they come in having? What was their employment history? Did they were they then or had they ever had loan repayment or scholarships? What did they know about health centers before they were hired? We looked at their job seeking practices. Where did they prefer to go look for jobs? What were really good job seeking tools? Where did they come from before they came to the health center? Were they satisfied? Which factors really impacted their satisfaction? What was their health center doing well in terms of engendering their satisfaction, and what could their health center do better to impact that satisfaction? What were their future plans? So for example, you're looking at the graph for anticipated future tenure. So how long are you planning to stay at your health center, to see if that was interesting at all. And then, you know, what are your needs in terms of training and that sort of thing. So we are looking at redoing this R&R survey again in late 2018, early 2019, and we're just now really trying to figure out what we want to ask and how we want to ask it differently, what we want to really potentially focus on. So for example, maybe do we need to get more specific about some of the staff demographics to see if the workforce is really matching our health center patient base. So for example, there's been some discussion in the past about, do you want to ask some of those SOGI questions, the sexual orientation and gender identity questions like we do for UDS? Is that something that we are interested in terms of workforce staff? It's a completely anonymous survey, so hopefully people would answer, but we just don't know. So those are some of the things we're thinking about. I'm going to say before I give it back to Allison, because I know I talk a lot, one of our biggest challenges with all of this data is making sure that people use it and understand how to use it and understand what's incorporated and how it is. Because one tenure metric may not be the same as another tenure metric, and one salary average may not be the same as a different salary average from another source. So we do things like conference sessions. I just did a session at a conference earlier this month looking at Region 8 and Region 10 data from the salary survey, because Region 10 also does a similar salary survey to us, and talking about some of our commonalities and differences between the regions. I do a distance learning event when our Region 8 report comes out with that great big salary survey to make sure people understand what's in it, know how to use it, and refer to it, because sometimes there's so much data that it's a little overwhelming. So figuring out new ways to make sure our health centers are using it, that's always one of those kind of future plans. How can I make sure they're utilizing it better? All right, I'm going to stop talking, Allison.
My goodness, I wish we could spend days and days with you. I always learn something new every time I hear you talk about this. It's actually physically incredible to me how much you guys do, and how much information you have and how much you need to deal with it. So thank you so much for that. Amazing. We have definitely some questions and we have time for them, which is a miracle on both sides. So one question that came in for you, Andrea, is how long does it take a health center to fill out their comp survey?
It's going to vary vastly from health center to health center. You know, I'm sure everybody's similar. We have health centers with 1 site and 10 people at it, and we have health centers with 20 sites and, you know, a couple thousand people. So there isn't an easy answer to that. But yes, it's significant, especially for our larger health centers.
Probably why you only do it every 2 years. By the time people recover, they're ready to do it again.
It's every once in a while, people ask us to do it every year, and then we look at them and we say, "Do you want to fill it out every year?" And they say no. So
Another question about your salary survey is, what is your participation rate from health centers? I understand that to be in compliance with antitrust laws, you need at least 5 unique data points per question, I think.
Yes. So we have, in 2018, for example, we had 86% of the health center organizations that operate in Region 8 respond to the survey. And when we create a report, we do not report an aggregated figure unless we have five data points for that figure, which sometimes means that we'll have to move some of that data around. So sometimes we have kind of a catch-all bucket, other administrative, for example. So for example, in the one that's on top of my head, I was thinking about from our conference session the other week, we only had one person reported under the title security in Region 10 this year. So they got moved to other administrative. But we also will look at some of the data that's reported to see if we can pull people out. So for example, we have a physician other category. We have physicians broken out by specialty. So family practice with and without OB, pediatrics, OBGYN, et cetera. And there's an other physician category. And so for example, if we have enough vision doctors reported, we can pull them out if we have at least 5, and usually we like to have more because 5 is not a very big data set. We can create new titles if we see that there are enough reported.
Amazing. And the last question I'm having here related to the salary survey and actually kind of all the data is really about how you're using it versus how much of it is for just collecting it for the health centers and for other people that need that kind of information.
Right. So, I mean, our main criteria is using it for the health centers because we want it to be a service for them. And then some of it may be more interesting to the PCAs than for others. So a lot of what we're doing is really driven by what the health centers want, and that will help them help them understand where they fall within their environment. But we find that when we go digging in that information, we often find data that's very interesting at the PCA level. Obviously, the needs assessment, that information, those challenges and those top topics, that's just really for the PCAs. But kind of looking at some of that turnover information is really going to guide the turnover and the vacancy rates and the challenges that they're expressing and the needs that they have in terms of recruitment and retention really can really help drive maybe where we need to focus. So for example, we have a part of our workforce program when we're looking at our job bank, we attend a lot of different job fairs and career events just to get the word out. We're not recruiters, but we do get out there to try to kind of drum up interest in the health center world. And you know, we've realized we need to be more cross-disciplinary and not just looking at events for physicians because of some of that data that's coming to us from all these other places.
Great. That sounds wonderful, and you're making the dream happen and helping me sleep at night, Andrea. So I'll say thank you so much for that information and for sharing your expertise and knowledge here. It looks like we're at the end of our questions for right now, but everyone has Andrea's contact information. If they want to get in touch with her directly. We also hope you'll get in touch with us, and also encourage you to connect with each other via the Integrated Work Strategies platform. As you all, I'm sure, know, the Workforce Development Peer Learning team went away this cycle, and so we're hoping that kind of keeping the workforce conversation going in this series is going to help to keep some of the spirit of that team alive, and we hope you'll continue to connect via the IWS platform. We also are going to be hopefully talking with you soon for the next set of our regular regional calls, where we're really going to be focusing on that turnover piece of information. As you heard, folks like Andrea already collect a lot of that information, and we don't want to replicate or do something really different from you either. So we're hoping to collect information from all of you on what you're doing on turnover to help us make something that's really helpful to you and to health centers. So stay tuned for that information, and please plan to join us next time. We're going to be working on kind of the counterpoint to workforce data, which is developing a workforce training, and that's Thursday, December 6th at 3 p.m. Eastern. So please stay in touch. Thank you so much, and have a great rest of your day.